Hello physics class. So we talked about reflection already within our waves. Now we're going to go over the basics of wave transmission. And again, what wave transmission means, it means when a wave goes from one medium to a new medium, what happens in that new medium, as well as usually there's actually a little tiny reflection piece back in that same medium. So let's kind of actually go through what this means and do some examples, okay? So I'm not going to do any of the worksheet work in this one. There's two other example videos from my worksheet coming up, but this is just talking about like what happens when a less dense meets a more dense, or when a more dense meets a less dense, what happens to those actual waves. So let's go through this. So here, I just want to point out the red is going to be always less dense, the blue is always going to be more dense. So for the first example, I'm going to do what happens to a little pulse, or like the crest of a wave. What happens to that when it actually goes from less dense to more dense? So you can see here we have a little pulse moving this way on a less dense. And then it's going to actually interact with a new medium that is more dense. So an example of this again would be if a sound wave goes from air to water, what's going to happen to that wave? So first off, most of the energy is going to go through. It is going to go through the medium and have some transmission. So there's going to be a new wave in here. So what is that wave going to look like? Again, because it's going from less to more dense, it's going to be harder to actually go through this. It's going to be harder to go through this more dense actual medium. So the energy, like all of the parts of the wave, are going to get smaller. So the amplitude is going to get smaller, the wavelength is going to get smaller. So the amplitude is going to go down, the wavelength is going to get smaller, as well as the speed that it travels with is also going to go down. So all the parts of the wave are going to actually go down. So it's going to look maybe something like this, still moving this direction. So that's part one. There also is, man, I keep dropping these. Let's try and not drop these. Well, I guess I was going to put this in the after. Whatever, I'll just say after it look like this. There's also going to be a little reflection piece. So what happens is when it actually hits the new medium, there's usually a little piece of the wave that gets reflected back, okay? And so when it goes from a less dense to more dense, this little medium change acts as like a fixed end, okay? So in the sense of like it's going to be hard for the actual energy to come back. So if you watch the fixed end part, the little reflective piece is going to come down to the bottom, okay? So I'm going to kind of draw this. And so we would have had this pulse that went this way, most of it went through, but a little piece got reflected back. And it went backwards. Now it's switched again because this acts, it acted as a fixed end, okay? So that's what, that's why I kind of did that phase shift, that's why it's on the bottom. Okay, so this would be the after. So we had that pulse, went this way. This is what it would look like after, small, going through on the same side, small little reflection coming back. So what if we have it the other way? What if we have a more dense going to a less dense? All right, so this is now a more dense going to a less dense. So we have our little pulse that is moving this direction. And then what happens here? We're still going to have most of it transmitted through, like most of the energy is going to go through this new medium. And what happens to that new wave? Well, again, because you're going from more dense to less dense, everything kind of goes, like gets bigger or faster, okay? So the amplitude is going to get bigger, the wavelength is going to get bigger, and then the speed is also going to get bigger, okay? So let's kind of show the afterwards of this. I'm going to draw this kind of big because that's what happened. Our wave gets quite a bit bigger. Okay, it's the same energy, but because it's traveling through a new medium, everything gets bigger. So that's the transmission piece. That's the energy that gets through. There is also usually a little tiny piece that gets reflected back. So if I get rid of this, because now that's gone through, there's a little piece that comes back. Because we were from the more dense to less dense, this is usually able to move a little, and so it acts as a free end. And so if you remember from a free end in a reflection, the actual wave stays on the same exact phase. It stays on the same side. So the little tiny wave that gets reflected back is going to stay on the same side. Okay, it is smaller because, again, most of the energy went through, but there usually is a little tiny energy that comes back after that little medium change, okay? So just to recap, when we go from less dense to more dense, everything gets smaller, and the little tiny reflective piece changes, it switches sides. When we go from more dense to less dense, you get everything bigger and faster, and the little tiny reflective piece also gets smaller but on the same side because it's more like a free end. So there's the basics of our wave transmission. I'm going to do 2 examples with some numbers and on an actual worksheet on the next 2 examples. All right, thanks class.